Hello dear learner, I welcome you to the lecture 4 of week 3 and the title of today's lecture is Jügen Habermas. He is one of the most important critical theorists and today in this lecture we will study about his political ideas and philosophy. So to begin with, first let us discuss what are the concepts that will be covered in today's lecture. First, we will understand what we mean by the notion of bourgeois public sphere. Then we will understand what we mean by the theory of communicative action, followed by Habermas' very important contribution towards the understanding of deliberative politics. Then we will understand what we mean by the notion of public reasoning, and then we will understand how Habermas has defined the notion of the word, which is cosmopolitanism. So, to begin with, first let us understand who was Jürgen Habermas and what were his most important works. So, to begin with, Jürgen Habermas is a German political philosopher, sociologist and social theorist, who is one of the most influential figures in critical theory traditions. We have already studied in week 1 during the many lectures that we had. There I have mentioned his name and his contributions. To again recall, some of his most important works are The Theory of Communicative Action, which was published in the year 1981. Then the second work is titled Between Facts and Norms, which was published in the year 1992. Then the third is Knowledge and Human Interest, which was published in the year 1968. And the fourth is The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, which was published much earlier in the year 1962. And besides these works, he has also written quite a number of other works, which we will see in the subsequent slides or lectures. Now, to begin with the first important concept which we must understand when we are talking about Jürgen Habermas, and that is the notion of bourgeois public sphere. According to Habermas, the notion of bourgeois public sphere, it arose in 18th century industrial society or with the rise of the liberal capitalism. Now, this notion of bourgeois public sphere is different from the private sphere of the market or whether the domestic sphere or the private sphere of the family and even the political authority of the state. So, you can see that he is talking about a totally distinct public sphere, which he has titled as bourgeois public sphere, and it is something or somewhat different from the traditional distinction between the two types of spheres, that is private sphere and public sphere, where we understand the meaning of public sphere to be associated with state and politics, and we understand the meaning of private sphere as that which is located to the domestic sphere or the family. Now, further defining the bourgeois public sphere, Habermas said that it is a sphere where private persons reason collectively about their common interest. So, it is a sphere where individual citizens, they come together and they talk in a collective fashion about their interest, about their objectives, and then they come at a consensus about the common interest. Now, basically the functioning of the bourgeois public sphere was to restrain the power, or you can say to limit the authority of the state. And this bourgeois public sphere, it consisted of certain institutions like the private clubs or the coffee houses and even the learned societies and the literary associations or the publishing houses, journals, newspapers, etc. So, you can see a wide array of institutions along with the private individuals have been incorporated in the bourgeois public sphere by Jürgen Habermas. But the importance of this public sphere has been diminished by a very important or a negative phenomena, which he has titled as re-feudalization of the civil society. Because actually in order to make the bourgeois public sphere work yes, successfully, it is essential that the civil society should be robust in nature, it should be functional in nature, it should be active, it should be autonomous, it should be free of any influences. But we find that during the later part of the 19th century, because of various reasons, there has occurred a re-feudalization of civil society. And some of the important reasons behind this phenomena, which has been underlined by Jügen Habermas, where first is because of the commercialization of civil society, because of the impact of the Western industrial capitalism, where everything is evaluated in terms of its commercial uses and success. So, it has led to the commercialization of the society, or to add here specifically the civil society, where everything is evaluated in terms of commodity, everything is evaluated in terms of money. And the second phenomena he has highlighted is the bureaucratization of political and non-political authority. So, that is another very important development which has taken place with the expansion of the function and of the nature of state. So, now we see that after Second World War, especially with the rise of the welfare state, there has been another important phenomena which has taken place, and that is the expansive nature or the expansion of bureaucracy to such an extent that now without it the functioning of the state is almost impossible. And this bureaucratization has spread not only at the level of state, but also in the non-political spheres. So, therefore, you can say that there has been a tendency of rising bureaucratization in every sphere of our life. And the third is, he mentioned, the growth of a manipulative or that the propagandist mass media. Now, we all are aware that with the rise of mass media, how the various agencies are being used to manipulate our opinion, or they try to manipulate our choices. And in terms of whether making political choices or in terms of making economic choices, we find that the influence of mass media is enormous. So, because of these various the outcome of the liberal capitalist economy, or because of the process of modernization, there has occurred a re-feudalization of the civil society, where the civil society has been divided into certain classes, where certain feudal lords, or you can say that certain groups or classes, they are in control of all the resources of the society, and the rest, which is a large segment of the population, is working under it, or they are in a position of subordination to that class. Now, such type of the transformation of civil society is not conducive for the effective functioning of the bourgeois public sphere. Then another very important phenomena which has accompanied the process of modernization, because we have studied that how modernization has impacted the structure and nature of economic development, but it has also impacted the nature of politics. And one of the important development which has been highlighted by him has been the scientization of politics and increase in the technocratic consciousness of contemporary society. So, this intrusion of science into politics, or the intrusion of technology into politics, and its overpowering influence over the norms and the values, or over the realities, or over the day-to-day wisdom, has been very alarming according to Habermas. In fact, Habermas traced the growth of technocracy in politics, or for that matter any field, to the erosion of distinction between theory and practice, and between practical wisdom and technical skill. We have already studied in the week 1 that the critical theories, all the critical theorists have argued for combining theory with practice, because if we do not combine theory with practice, then the theory has got very less meaning or very less relevance, and any practicalities, if it is not supported by theory, is having no meaning at all. So, therefore, theory and practice has to be combined, and if you want to make transformation or change in the society, it has to be backed by certain normative theory or values. So, therefore, Habermas argues that because of the growing importance of technology, or in other words he said that this growth of technology or this overpowering of technology over our lives could take place because of the separation of the facts from the values or from the theory and the practice, and also between practical wisdom and technical skill. Now, these are two important dimensions of our life, and both have its own importance. Every problems or all the social problems, it cannot be solved only by the technocratic approach. For that, sometimes we need certain practical wisdom, we need certain traditional values to understand the problems and develop solutions. So, both are needed along with the technical approach. There is also need of the practical wisdom. And the third, this point is related with the last point, he was critical of positivism being considered as the only source of genuine knowledge and above any further critical analysis. So, a hierarchy of knowledge system has developed in which science has been placed at the top of the hierarchy because of various reasons. And this ruling of science over other types of knowledge or over other forms of epistemology is not conducive for the development of society, because it is not only science, but there are other sources of knowledge which needs to be understood, which needs to be analyzed to get a complete idea of any event or processes in the society. And the second important thing he criticized against the rising importance of science or the overruling of science over other disciplines is that it has been placed above any criticism. Anything which is science, which is based on scientific method or scientific methodology, they are the supreme and they cannot be challenged. Anything which actually cannot be understood by science, they are not considered worth to be considered, or they are not considered as a true form of knowledge. So, such type of understanding or placing or giving supreme importance to science or positivism has been criticized by Habermas. Now, Habermas have argued, now we have already studied about the meaning of rationalization and how it is a characteristic of modern society, how with a rational bent of mind we could challenge various feudal practices in the medieval era. We could challenge so many superstitions and wrong practices in the medieval era. So, the advent of modernity is characterized by the process of rationalization or rational thinking. Now, there have been many critical theorists who have made a critique of this idea of rationalization, but Habermas had argued that always the process of rationalization or the rational perspective, it does not leads to loss of meaning and freedom, which has been generally has been argued by so many other thinkers which belong to the critical traditions. But he argued that it is not always that the process of rationalization leads to loss of meaning and freedom. It also acts as a source of human emancipation, and this is very much true, because I have explained in lecture 1 also in the week 1 that how the Enlightenment tradition forms also a very important part of the critical tradition, because Enlightenment tradition through the processes of the understanding of rationality and through the notion of individual rights could break away all the barriers and all the superstitious practices of the medieval era. So, therefore, it is not always a means of humans' loss of freedom, it is also a means of human emancipation. So, in order to understand how, it is necessary to understand Habermas' classification of two types of action. He said that there are two types of action. First is the consent oriented or communicable, and second is the success oriented or the purpose, or that it is a type of rational action. Now, first let us understand again what we mean by the process of rationalization. Now, this term was coined by Max Weber, a German sociologist, It aims at the replacement of traditions, values and emotions as motivators of behavior in society with concepts based on rationality and reason. As I have just now explained, that how with the help of this notion of reason and the concept of rationality, we could challenge all the medieval eras, the wrong practices or the evil practices or the feudal practices and various forms of ignorance and all those behaviors which were violative of the rights of the individual. So, when we understand the meaning of rationalization, now it is important to understand what are the different types of actions and what do they mean according to Jürgen Habermas. Now, first is the success oriented action. Now, he has again divided the success oriented action into two types. The first is the strategic and second is the instrumental action. Now, as the name suggests, instrumental actions are aimed at attaining certain goals. They are accomplished by following certain technical rules and appraised from the point of efficiency. So, as the name suggests, the instrumental action means that they are those actions which are useful or which are used for attaining certain goals, and they are evaluated by the efficiency in which we attain our goals, and they are accomplished by following certain technical rules. So, they are instrumental and therefore, they have been categorized under the success oriented action. And the second type of action is the strategic action. Now, the strategic actions are actions that aims at influencing others for the purpose of achieving certain ends. So, it is strategic in nature and it is done with a certain objective in mind, and that objective is to influence others to gain certain advantage to oneself or for using others for one's own end. So, therefore, both the instrumental action and the strategic action are aimed at attaining success by the individual or for the individual. But there is a third type of action about which Habermas has emphasized a lot. This action is very important for not only making of laws, but also for the successful working of democracy, and that action is a communicative action. Now, communicative action is distinct from other two in the sense that its goal is not to influence others. So, you can see that one of the very important distinction between communicative action and the success oriented action is that its goal is not to influence others. Its goal is not to use others as instruments or to influence others or to attain success. Then what is the objective? The objective of communicative action is to reach an agreement or mutual understanding with one or more actors about something in the world. So, it is a process of coming to an agreement which is based on certain talks, certain deliberations, mutual consensus, and this deliberation is about something which is common or certain common issues or problems which affects all of them. So, it is a process of arriving at a consensus by mutual discussion, by mutual communication, by sitting together and deliberating, and it is a continuous process. Now, again he defines that this communicative action is done through a cooperative process of interpretation and reason. It is a cooperative process, it is not a competitive process, because in the modern notion of politics we find that everybody is in competition with each other. Also in the economic sphere we find, in the educational sphere, everywhere we find that there is so much prevalence of competition. Habermas argues that instead of competition, we must have the notion of cooperation, because by cooperation only we can derive at certain interpretation based on use of certain rationality. And this reason helps in criticizing validity claims. Now, what we mean by validity claims? Now, according to Jügen Habermas, validity claims refers to expectations that underlie successful communication. Now, we all are indulging in so many types of communication in our everyday lives, in the societal level, at the political level, at the economic level, and we have certain expectations, or you can say there are certain dimensions to our communication. And what are those dimensions? The first dimension is truth, which means that the speaker asserts that their statement corresponds to reality. That means, whenever we make any statement, or we are making any argument, or we are making any demand in the political sphere or in the public sphere, we try to assert that it is in tune with the reality. It is not something which is abstract or which is having no connection with our real lives. It is having connection with the reality. That means, it is true, it is not false. And the second is, that is the notion of truthfulness. The speaker asserts that they believe that their statement is true and they are not intentionally deceiving the listener. So, it is not simply that their statement is having connection with reality, it is something which is real, which concerns all, but also it is true, it is right. And the objective of his statement or her statement is not to deceive others, or not to create an illusion, or not to create a false story, but it is a true story, or you can say it is based on facts. And the third is normative rightness. The speaker asserts that their statement conforms to accepted norms and values. Now, this is very important, because whatever we say and whatever we do, everything is guided by certain norms and certain values. We all are guided in our behavior by certain norms. So, therefore, when we make certain statement, it has to conform to accepted norms and values, because if we say something or if we take certain actions which does not conform to existing values and norms, then it will be very difficult for the other people to accept them. So, whatever we are speaking or the communication we are indulging in, it has to be in parlance with the notion of truth or the truthfulness, and the third is the normative rightness. But as we have mentioned in the previous slide, that according to Jügen Habermas, the reason helps in criticizing the validity claims. So, whenever we are making any statement, or the individuals are making any statement, or they are communicating with each other, so if we have the reason, if we have the power of rationality or the communicative rationality, then we will be very empowered to criticize in a genuine manner the various validity claims raised by different individuals. So, that is the importance of rationality, or that is the importance of reason in the communicative action processes. But unfortunately, Habermas argues that the notion of communicative rationality, or the notion of this criticism of validity claims, it has become defunct or displaced, and the process of displacement have occurred because of market and administrative state. Because market and administrative state have developed their own forms of rationality, which is functional rationality, or in other words we can say the type of rationality that suits their function, that suits their objective. So, they have actually displaced modes of integration based on communicative reason. So, this communicative reason bringing about consensus on issues which are common to us, and the importance of communicative action in terms of talking, in terms of deliberation, that has been gradually lost because of the functional rationality, which is a type of rationality which is developed by the market and the state. Now, Habermas draws the legitimacy of law from rationality, which also draws upon the dimension of communicative reason and action. His principle of discourse states only those action norms are valid to which all those possibly affected could agree as participants in rational discourses, and its specification as a rule of moral argumentation as a principle of universality. So, all those action norms which are arrived at by mutual a type of deliberation or consensus or a type of rational discourse, and which can be universally applicable. So, such type of action norms are valid and they form the basis formation of law or the drawing of the legal measures. Now, combining this with principle of democracy, which states only those judicial statutes may claim legitimacy that can meet with the assent of all citizens in a discursive law making process that in turn has been legally constituted. So, these are the words of Habermas which I have quoted in this slide, that only those statutes or those laws can claim legitimacy which are based on the acceptance of all the citizens in a discursive law making process, or you can say through the process of deliberations. Similarly, he argued that the principle of democracy is not subordinate to the system of rights. They are equiprimordial or co-original and they are reciprocally explain each other. So, both the democracy and the system of rights, they are equal, they have their common origin or they are co-original. He also drew attention to the intersubjective nature of rights. In the words of Habermas, I quote, "At a conceptual level, rights do not immediately refer to atomistic and estranged individuals who are passively set against one another. On the contrary, as elements of legal order, they presuppose collaboration among subjects who recognize one another in their reciprocally related rights and duties as free and equal consociates under law." Now, this mutual recognition is constitutive for a legal order from which actionable rights are derived. So, when we are talking about the liberty of the individuals, we are talking about interrelated liberty, which is also has been termed by Habermas as intersubjective nature of rights. Now, this synthesis between legal form and rights takes place in two stages. The first is linkages of formal law with an equal right to the subjective liberty, which means individual undertake to regulate their common life through the legal norms, but it should be done in a way that grant to each member an equal right to liberty. So, right to equal liberty or the intersubjective liberty is directly related with the legal norms or the formulation of laws by the state. And the second is, a system of rights can develop only when the legal form is made use of in an exercise of citizens' public autonomy, or in other words, a system of rights can only develop when the citizens, they have deliberated upon it and it has been given a legal form, and this process has been done in the dimension of the citizens' public autonomy. Now, public autonomy refers to discourse principle where norms are agreed upon by the people in a rational discourse. So, ultimately the same thing which Habermas is pointing out, that when we talk about the public autonomy of individuals, it means that individuals in their public sphere have the autonomy to discuss and deliberate and share their opinion. He connects the derivation of system of rights from the private and public autonomy of citizens, as we have already seen. So, at the end of this lecture, I have given you a couple of activity questions where all these questions are based on what I have discussed in this slide. And also, to steer your imagination, I have given you a couple of statements and questions so that you can ponder over these issues and think that what can be the possible solutions to these questions. With that, I come to the end of this lecture and thank you very much.